So we're now live, but we've got 15 minutes before we're going to officially start. This is just the time for people to maybe say hi in the chat and have a look at the during the meeting slide, which just talks a little bit about the chat function. And we're going to have some polling questions. And we've got an idea of if people want to make a pledge or a commitment to keep the conversation going, then please, by all means, that's something we would be interested in people doing too. But we'll just wait for people to join us over the next 15 minutes. So we've got loads of chat going on already, which is fantastic. It would just be really nice if people could just say a hi with their name and where they're from, just to kind of start us off, just so that we can capture later on. We are going to start promptly at 10 o'clock. So we will, I'm not going to stay on until 10, because we were just going to see me staring at the screen, but looking forward to sharing the learning at 10 o'clock. So I will see you in a bit. Okay, I'm joining now because we've only got 3 minutes before we're due to start. So it's great that so many people are introducing themselves in the chat. That's great. So it'll be good to see that later when we go through the chat after the event. Please, we've got some polling questions coming up throughout the event as well, which I'll tell you how to fill in. But you should see on the right-hand side, as you're looking at your screen, that there will be a tab that says polls. There may not be anything up there yet, but when our first polling question comes up in a few minutes, then you should be able to answer that. We've got a couple of minutes before we start. The International Women's Day theme this year is Choose to Challenge. So we were thinking about if people wanted to think about a pledge or a commitment they wanted to make around making things better for women and girls, then it'd be great if we can capture some of that in the chat as well. But you don't have to do that yet, obviously, but maybe throughout the session anytime, because we will be looking at the chat later. We're going to be doing a learning pack, which I'll tell people about several times. So all the chat that we get is going to be, is going to be able to be included in the learning pack, which will make it really rich. So I can see it moving quickly. So really fantastic that we've got so many people who are putting things in their comments, all their comments. Everyone's going to be automatically muted. Just is clear that, unless they're a speaker. I'll introduce myself in a minute. It's a lovely day, International Women's Day. Nice blue sky. Not so nice in Cumbria, the weather. Oh, okay. I've got blue sky where I am. Okay, so it's 10 o'clock. So because we've got so much packed into this meeting, I think it would be great, if we started now. So are you able to move on to our first slide? Great. So welcome everybody. This is the North Eastern Cumbria International Women's Day event, hosted by the National Lottery Community Fund. And my name is Rowan Miller, and I'm one of the regional heads of funding. And I'm going to be facilitating this learning session, which mainly means I'm going to be timekeeping because we've got a packed agenda. The session has been co-produced with 2 funding officers from the North Eastern Cumbria regional team, with DMSS, who helped to capture learning from the Women and Girls Initiative, and 5 Women and Girls Specialist Services in the North East in Cumbria, and that's the Angelou Centre, Aspire, A Way Out, Women's Community Matters in Barrow, and the Young Women's Outreach Project. We have sent many briefings to you in your teasers in leading up to this event, which I hope you found useful, but we're going to have a lot more learning from the women and girls sector to come this morning. Can I have the next slide, please, A? Okay, so we are here in response to grant holders across the country who've been funded by our Women and Girls Initiative strategic programme, asking for a way to build stronger relationships with funders and commissioners. We have, it's now got up to 250 people signed up to this event, and that's more than any other online webinar that we've organised, which I think really shows the huge interest there is in the North Eastern Cumbria to support better futures for women and girls. So we're really excited by that. And I think it's a real opportunity, for people to see, who is here and to connect a little bit if possible. I know it's hard when it's in the chat, but hopefully listening to some of the speakers and things will help with that. You're going to receive all this PowerPoint information in a learning pack. So don't feel you need to write notes, but obviously do if you want, but all this is going to come to you. And also this event will be recorded and available on YouTube. As I've said, please post comments and questions. Everything will be considered, and we're unlikely to have that much time today to discuss them, but we will look at them outside of the session and include as many as possible, and any answers we can share in the learning pack. This will be sent to everybody who attends this event. The more comments you can put in the chat, then the richer the learning pack will be. So let's move on to the next slide and look at what we have for you this morning. There's the agenda, and the purpose is really to share learning. That's the main thing I think we want to do this morning, and to build some relationships between women and girls services and funders and commissioners. and to get across some key messages and support the incredibly valuable women and girls sector in this region and beyond. We are on a very tight timescale of 120 minutes, 5 speakers, 3 panelists, and hearing from our specialist women and girls services. We're going to start with the 5 speakers. Each speaker will talk for between 5 and 10 minutes, and we will then have a 5-minute break, and we'll then hear from the women and girls services and 3 panelists, Culla Warnock, Jess Donnellan and Caroline McDonald. We will make sure we capture as much of your discussion as possible, and we have 5 polling questions. And the first one is coming up now. So I'm hoping this is going to work. This is the first technical bit. On the right-hand side of your screen as you're looking at it, you should see a tab that says polls. Please go to that tab and answer the question that you see there. It's anonymous, completely anonymous. Please choose one answer only, so make it it's the closest answer that maybe that applies to you, and then we will be able to have a sense of who's in the room or who's on the screen, whichever way we look at it. So the question is, how would you best describe your role? And we should then fairly soon get results coming up, which I imagine are going to come onto the screen. But this is the first time we've done this, so it might be that everyone's able to. Oh, here we go. It's in the poll. So once you've submitted your vote, you can start to see who's on, who's in there. So we've got 29% at the moment are women and girls providers, 25% are funders, 15% third sector, 13% other, 8% consultant, 2% commissioners, and 6% health, education and social work and care professionals. That's really interesting. Great. So we've got a lovely combination of a whole load of people here. So we've got a nice broad audience. And it's really now, I think, time for me to introduce our first speaker. And we're really thrilled to introduce Claire Dove, CBEDL, who is the National Crown Representative for the VCSE sector and has been awarded and honoured for her work many, many times. And I know Claire hasn't felt too well, so I'm really thrilled that you were able to come this morning, Claire. And great, you're on screen now, and we can move on to the next slide as well, which tells everyone a little bit more about Claire. So over to you, Claire.
Oh, well, thanks very much indeed, and can I wish you all a wonderful International Women's Day. We shouldn't celebrate women just once a year, but I think today is solidarity around the world with women and girls, and what we've achieved and what we've still got to do to get that equality we all strive for. So it's great to be with you this morning. So I've been asked to talk through a bit about my role as Crown Representative. Sounds very grand. However, it's an essential piece of work, again, that will help us, I feel, as women represent women's organisations, etc. But also my commitment in supporting women and girls, and some of the work that I've been doing over the majority of my working life. And then finally, just a little bit about how the importance of women's services to support women, to support families, and to grow families. And so I'll speak a little bit about that. But firstly, a Crown Rep, what's that? Well, Crown Reps were introduced a number of years ago by government, and it was in the first instance to support their strategic suppliers, to be that bridge between strategic suppliers and government. But there were 2 Crown Reps roles that were different. And mine was my colleague, Martin Traynor. His was to look after the SME sector, and mine is to look after the VCSE sector. But my role had been vacant for a number of years when I came in, so it was a bit difficult. But the main essential part of my my role was to drive social and environmental value through government, change behaviours, make sure that every pound of taxpayers' money was there to impact on the wider good of our environment, economy, and our communities, and to open up a diverse range of supplies to government. So that's what we were, that's what I was there to do. And just shortly after I came into government, we had the collapse of Carillion, which showed, you know, the fragility of these major players in government that perform contracts, and the impact that that had, not only on, you know, that government contract, but also on the subcontractors, on the apprenticeships that were part of that. So there was a whole step change. And then I was chair of SEUK many years ago when we introduced the Social Value Act, but it didn't have the teeth it needed to do the work of opening contracts up and getting much more from each pound, as I've said previously. And so we then went from acknowledging social value to reporting on it. And that is the game changer. That has absolutely ripped through government, with us training 4,000 of our staff. Social value, our framework became live on the 1st of January. And so that, I'll come back to that later. But however, my substantial role for over 40 years was working in the VCSE sector. Well, I worked longer, but my main role was in an organisation called the Blackburn House Group. And it was a project that we started in the 90s. There was a group of women, and we believed that we had to have more women's opportunities. And then at that time, Europe, the European Social Fund, had a fund that was about addressing women's participation in the labour market, and especially in non-traditional industries. And so we were able to secure funding from that, and then the City Council funded us, and that was history. We thought technology might be a growth industry in the 80s, and foresight's a wonderful thing. And we went in technology. We wanted women not to just be the data entry points, but to be the analysts, to be those senior women in those positions. And we started with 30 women and seven staff. But it was the women who came on the programs that wanted more. For some of them who'd been failed by the traditional educational system, it was the first time in their lives that they achieved a certificate. But we built the programs around the needs of women. We didn't try and bolt them into something that we perceived was the right way to do something. And from there, we grew substantially, more women. And when you had 200 women for 30 places, how do you play that one? Because everybody's got a need. So we went larger, and in the end, we took over a building. We raised 4 million. It was a Grade 2 listed building in Liverpool, which just so happened to be the first girls' school in the country in 1844. And Charles Dickens, as a social reformist, talked about the right of girls to education. So that was it. We were off. And when we moved into Blackburn House, we were then able to open up 1,000 opportunities to women. We had over 80 staff. 50% or more at some stages were ex-students, because they knew exactly. But what was the success of the women? So from Maria Parsington, who was a cleaner, who cleaned my office at one time, and I kept saying to her, "Why don't you come on a course, Maria?" She said, "No, I'm a woman with a broom." She did in the end. And she made great strides, and she in the end became a teacher, and now is a deputy head in a school. But what Maria said is what we all know. As we empowered Maria with education, it had the ripple effects for her family. Her children, her family never were university people, but suddenly she was aspiring for more, and therefore her children aspired for more, and both children did really well. And there was Laura, a young woman who was a carer, who had to look after her dad, but we were able to sort her timetable around her particular needs. And for her, it was liberating from caring responsibilities to have the opportunity to come into an environment that fostered her. And unfortunately, her father did die in the end. She didn't have a mother, but she did really, really well. But it was the support that we were able to give these women. And many of you may know Mohammed Yunus from Grameen Bank, and he was the Nobel Peace Prize winner. And what he said was his greatest achievement was in those villages in Bangladesh was empowering women, because it then spread right across the village. But back to, I retired last year, and it was very hard, but I needed to step away and do something before I retire. I don't think you ever retire. And my current role is about driving value through. And the framework that we've built, and I hope you can have a look at that. It's a notice PPN 20 ///06. Anyway, it's on the government website. And it is about COVID recovery and helping communities. It is about tackling economic inequality, including creating new businesses, social businesses, jobs, reskilling, fighting climate change, driving equal opportunity, reducing disability, the employment gap, the ethnic pay gap. Obviously, we look at the women's pay gap, and improving health and well-being. And it's linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is important. And what was more important is that this framework is based on quality, not on quantity. It's not a large company saying I can do 200 apprenticeships. It's about the quality of that offer. And we're not interested in, well, obviously interested in numbers, but not in providing a service that doesn't work. Why does social value matter? The public sector spends £292 billion a year, of which 49 billion is central government. And so how do we build trust with the sector? And it's through openness, building trust and transparency, but it's also what I said before. It's about the co-creating of services that are needed and work, and it's working in parallel with the sector to understand, not putting a finger in the air and thinking what it is we need. And although I was a woman when we started Women's Blackburn House, it was about putting the service around that person and not plugging them into something that we thought they needed. We do need a diverse range of suppliers. And I have a number of task forces I'm working with, women-led, BAME-led and disability-led, who are around the table working with us on this agenda. But also, I think the most important thing is, how do we have government services that address some of the key issues? And not everything should be a contract, because contracts work. However, we still need grant aid in the system, because if you have rape crisis or you have women's support groups that are dealing with some of the most difficult issues of the day, they should not have to be scrambling around looking for the next grant to keep them open. It should be a statutory service. Like anything, like all our others, it should be like the NHS. It's statutory. Women have to have that address to that. But today we celebrate women across the world, and many women before us have trailblazed the pathway with extraordinary work. And many of us have taken up the mantle and taken this work forward. And we have the responsibility of empowering our girls and our young women to be the best they can have, to be the best, to have the opportunities without some of the barriers that we've experienced. I'd love to talk longer about Blackburn House and some of the things we took with us. And if you look at
time.
If you look at considerate construction, you will see that was part of how we developed Blackburn House in the refurbishment.
Yeah.
But I think finally is I've been inspired like leaders like Christina Lagarde, who was in charge of the IMF, because she was in such a pivotal position in the world of business. But what she did was that position was to highlight the role of women, the perils of the business sector if they didn't embrace women, the 50%. And at the Dimbleby lecture, when she stood up and said to the mainly male audience, if you don't have women on your boards, if you don't have women in senior positions, your businesses will not survive in the long term. And she talked about we know Lehman Brothers brought the banking system down. And she said, if we'd had Lehman sisters, we would have had a really different output. So I look forward to working with you and others. And I know, especially up in Cumbria, I live in Liverpool, so I'm not far from you, some of the issues that face especially women in the rural environment and the support that they need particularly. And so I hope that we work together. I hope you work with us in government now, and we're able to support women and girls and create a better society, a society for the good. So good luck for the rest of the day, and I wish you all really well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Claire. That was a really fantastic introduction to our event. So some fantastic points there that I'm sure we've captured. And any chat people do, please do make comments, and we can have a look at those comments later. We now need to move on swiftly to our next polling question. So again, if you want to look on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a polling question, which is, what are you hoping for the event? So if people want to just put one answer, their one and closest answer, again, remember it's anonymous. So it might be learning, inspiration, new connections or ideas. I'm putting down learning. Right, so yeah, 35%. Oh no, going up. Learning's going up quite quickly. Ideas to take away as well. Opportunities for collaboration. So we'll have all these polling answers in our learning pack that we're going to send out to everybody after the event. Moving on to our next speaker, I'm really delighted to invite Ellie De Decker, who is the England Director of the National Lottery Community Fund, to speak to you now. So straight over to you, Ellie.
Thank you very much. Rowan, can you hear me? Can you just confirm?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. And thank you, Rowan, for the introduction. And thank you, Claire, for your inspiring introduction to today. So I'm Ellie De Decker. And as England Director, I oversee the National Lottery Community Fund's grant-making activity across England. So you might know that the National Lottery Community Fund is the largest funder of community activity in the UK. And thanks to players of the National Lottery, we are able to distribute over £500 million into communities every year. It's really great to see so many of you joining us this morning, in particular on International Women's Day. And this event is a real demonstration of how we want to work. We want to work in collaboration with yourselves from different parts from the sector. As Claire said, we need to come together as a third sector, the public sector, and also the private sector, if we want to be able to overcome some of the issues that our society is facing. I particularly wanted to thank the Angelou Centre, A Way Out, Young Women's Outreach Project, Aspire, Women's Community Matters, and DMSS for working with us to make today's event possible. So I know it's a very busy agenda this morning, and I've been politely asked to keep it very short. So I just wanted to make a few brief points. So as a National Lottery Community Funder, we are a generalist funder, but the women and girls sector is a very important one to us. We have funded the sector consistently for years through dedicated initiatives such as the Women and Girls Initiative, through which we committed about £45 million, but also across our other funding streams. Much of our funding now flows through regional teams, and each region has a Women and Girls champion. And these champions take a lead in assessing applications, sharing learning, but also building relationships, again, with agency across the sector. And many of the champions that we have in our teams have direct frontline experience of delivering services. So over the last 5 years across England, we have committed about £160 million to the women and girls sector. And we're committed to continuing to support the sector going forward. I wanted to give you that reassurance today. However, we all know that funding will be really tight. It was already tight before the crisis, and we all know that the evidence from the sector strongly indicates that there will be a significant increase in women and girls coming forward and needing specialist support, specifically following the lockdowns. And we already know that there's a long waiting list for specialist support. And we're not going to, and we are not necessarily at this point reaching all those that really need support the most. So as a sector, and that again, that includes delivery organizations, but also funders, commissioners, we're going to have to come together and think how we're going to make the most of the resources that we have available. And for me, that means two things really. First of all, we're going to have to learn from each other. What works, what doesn't work, and how do we best reach those most vulnerable? There's great practice out there. There's strong evidence out there, but we need to take the time and create the opportunity to come together so that that learning gets shared. The second point for me is really that we're going to have to work together, collaborate, partner. We can't afford to all work in isolation. I know many of you already work together, and so many of you joining us this morning demonstrate your willingness to do more. And as funders ourselves, we're really actively exploring, and we're committed to seeing how we can work with others, funders as well, to make sure that our funding reaches further. So that's why I personally wanted to be here this morning and support events such as the one that we're having today, because it's an opportunity to learn, but also to forge and further develop relationships. And hopefully that will lead to greater collaboration and partnership working. So I hope that you have a very stimulating morning, that you'll learn a lot, and that you'll forge new relationships. And I really thank you for being with us. And I will now hand you over to our next presenter.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ellie. Yep. So thanks so much for that. And we'll now hand straight on to Yasmin Khan, who is has a wealth of experience working with women and strategically tackling inequalities. So if we can have her slide up. And Yasmin, are you here to talk? I think that, yeah, that's.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Yep, you can hear me?
Yep, can hear you. Yes, absolutely.
Hello, thank you, and happy International Women's Day to all of you who joined the call today. My name is Yasmin Khan, and I'm the founder director of the Halo Project charity based in Teesside, and we provide a victim support service for victims experience forced marriage, honour-based violence, FGM, domestic and sexual abuse, modern slavery, and exploitation. And it was absolutely a brilliant hearing from Claire, particularly around the issues around this should be the services for violence against women services should actually be standard. They're actually an emergency service. So that's where I'd like to frame the very short time I have to share with you some of the challenges for organisations like us who provide a crucial service, a critical service to victims who and their families who are at risk of harm. Now, in this pandemic, you will have heard a number of phrases, and one of the phrases I like to coin is the issues around violence against women and girls, particularly for Black and minoritized communities, is sometimes referred to as the silent pandemic, because we haven't even scratched the surface of the issues and the deep-rooted concerns of agencies who are trying to do as much as they can on sometimes a shoestring, but the pandemic has really exasperated the pressures on the sector, and that's what I'd really like to talk about. So what's our experience of working within the pandemic, and also the challenges that we inherited really way before the pandemic, which was working at capacity, working with complex and multiple barriers, and working with agencies to support and protect women and their families who need help. So we know that domestic and sexual violence is something that happens in all communities. But why is it different working within the Black and minoritized communities? Well, for the obvious reasons, there's an issue around the language, but that's not always the main reason. It takes a woman who's experienced abuse so many incidents to actually reach and call for help. And when you add in the issue of the shame and the dishonor associated with the abuse in many of the communities that we support, I think you can see that the pattern is it's extremely difficult to make that first call for help. So we need to do as much as we possibly can to support victims wherever they're presented, whether they're in immediate direct referrals to our service, or whether they've actually sought help from police or statutory services. So that's why our model of working is really about supporting the victim through housing and interventions, but also to raise the awareness with our partner agencies. So police, the strategic partnerships that we've created, we feel are very, very important in ensuring wherever victims present themselves, the right support is given to them, and the awareness and the insight of what services need to do better. And our experience in the pandemic is that if you look at a victim who's actually seeking help, the pandemic has created several challenges in that coercion is integral to abuse, especially when you're dealing with honor-based abuse and forced marriages. So when you're looking at that situation within the home environment, to get that call for help, which has been animated by the coercion within the family because of the restrictions, that's something that is a huge barrier. And I really don't feel that we've really scratched the surface, and we will see an increase, and we will continue to see an increase. In one quarter, we had 145% increase in complexity of cases, and that involved an increase in representation at MARAC. We also saw 150% increase in the direct calls to our service within the pandemic. And here we are in 2021, where many organisations within the violence against women sector were looking at a milestone piece of legislation which we felt would really amplify the need to do more for victims. And there is many camps within the sector which look at, it's a very good move in the right direction, that something is going to position the commitment of governments and public bodies. But also there is some very worrying concerns within the sector that the rights of migrant women haven't been considered, and that the domestic abuse is there not to protect some victims, it should be there to protect all victims. So the impact for the sector has been quite profound in that the disclosures have increased, but unfortunately the evidence and the knowledge within services has somewhat been very, very reactive. And I would like to say that working with safeguarding partners, what the pandemic has certainly highlighted is where there were cracks in services before, it's been amplified throughout the pandemic. So very often organisations like us and others you'll hear from today have almost picked up the baton of the statutory organisation, are supporting women for much longer, are providing that emergency support, but also what we refer to as the aftercare support isn't really written in any policy. So what happens when we speak to victims and survivors of abuse? One victim said to me, when I was abused, it was good because I had the help that I needed. I got the accommodation I wanted and made sure that my children were safe. She said, but 3 months down the line, when the emergency situation went away and I was protected and I was in safe accommodation, the realization of the 20 years of abuse that occurred just dawned on me like a death. And she said, where were all those services then? This is where I needed the most help. And she had some real concerns around mental health. So we helped her through some of the programs that we're developing. So one of my main points really is organizations like us and others, the specialist sector organizations that you'll hear from and involved in the event today, really are picking up the statutory responsibility. There is nowhere else for women to go to seek help. And once they've engaged with your service, it's not right for them to be navigating their way through the different services that are there to help. We must be there to provide that conduit. And another thing I would really like to say is when we look at the prevention, protection and support issue for victims and survivors from particularly Black and minoritized communities, you know, their first point of disclosure is the only time you're going to get the call for help. And if we don't get that call of help right at the first instance, we're not going to get it right down the end of the line. And I'll never forget what the victim has said to me. She said, I feel that the service that you have been providing is an emergency service. And I think that that emergency service is something that has to continue. And really, I have to say thank you to the lottery for the funding, which has enabled us to be innovative in the way that we deliver our services. It's enabled that collaboration, but most of all, it's ensured that survivors who need help can go to a specialist support agency and know that they will be supported throughout the process. And we only have to look at some of the conviction rates on some issues around forced marriages. You know, in 2014, when the legislation was introduced, how many successful prosecutions have there been? Very, very few, not enough in my opinion. So we must be holding those perpetrators account, and there's so much more that we can do. And I think it's really important that we do work collaboratively. But thank you so much to the lottery for allowing us to support as many victims as we do and to continue to do so. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Yasmin. Some really important points there that you got across, and that I'm really, really grateful to you for that. That inspiring talk, and some comments coming through as well on the chat. Rebecca and Joe, by the way, are the chat monitors. So, you know, we have got two people who are looking at all the chat as it comes through. I'm going to move on, though, very quickly to the next polling question, which is polling question number 3. And what we're looking at is, how familiar are you with the women and girls sector and some of the issues that are coming up in the northeastern Cumbria? So if people want to go to the quickly to a poll, and if you want to start putting down how familiar you feel, and then we can start looking at what's coming up. So quite a few in the fairly familiar by the looks of it, and a few also in very familiar or not very. So it'd be interesting for us to bring that into your learning pack later. I'm going to move on now we have 2 more speakers before we have a break. The first speaker is Caroline Howe, Caroline joins us from Lloyds Bank Foundation, and really, really pleased to have Caroline, who was very involved in the Transformation Fund, and that's what she's going to be talking to us about. And then Caroline is going to introduce or move straight on to Dr. Sarah Scott from DMSS, who grew up in Middlesbrough and is one of the learning partners of the Women and Girls Initiative, and at the forefront of learning and co-production. So Sarah is going to talk about the learning from the National Lottery Community Fund Women and Girls Initiative. But first, let's hear from Caroline. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you. So for those of you that don't know us, at Lloyds Bank Foundation, we support small and local charities tackling complex social issues with a focus on funding, development and influencing. And one of our focus areas for influencing has been domestic and sexual abuse sectors. So alongside strategic investments in things like Drive, which is focused on domestic abuse perpetrators and work to try and improve commissioning, we launched an open programme back in 2017, which looked to support specialist services, specialist domestic and sexual abuse services, to pursue their own influencing objectives. Now, we did that because through our funding of service delivery and relationships we have with grant holders, we know that services face many external challenges, but also that they had the ideas about how to tackle them. Too often they just typically lack the capacity to do something about it. And as a principle at the foundation, we're really keen to support small local charities to raise their voices. So through Transform, we funded 16 projects with an investment of £1.6 million. And alongside the initial 2 years of funding, we worked with DMSS, and as Rowan said, you'll hear from Sarah shortly, to support grant holders through developing a theory of change, coaching support, and DMSS also worked with us on a summative evaluation of the programme as well. So we tried to develop the group of grant holders as a cohort. So we organised peer learning events and provided opportunities for grant holders to build connections. And it was quite a diverse cohort. So we had projects targeted at different levels, whether that was local, national or regional influencing, and adopting lots of different approaches. So whether that was about trying to improve frontline practice, developing networks and partnerships between charities and statutory agencies, or more traditional research and campaigns. And we were really pleased with the progress that most of those projects made, like recognising that monitoring and evaluation of influencing work is always really hard. But to give you a flavour of some of the work, so My Sister's Place in Middlesbrough developed a trauma-informed model of empowerment training that helped 250 practitioners embed a trauma-informed approach in organisations right across the country. We worked with Latin American Women's Rights Service on their Step Up Migrant Women campaign, bringing the sector together to campaign for migrant women's rights. And while it's still got a way to go, as Yasmin mentioned, to improve protection for migrant survivors, it's already helped to bring changes to some police approaches, prompted a Home Office review, and had recommendations supported by the Domestic Abuse Bill Committee as well. And we worked with Women's Counselling and Therapy Service in Leeds, involving people in Leeds, obviously, and they got all 5 Leeds statutory bodies to adopt a citywide policy statement on supporting adult survivors of child sexual abuse. And that's helped to shift commissioning to reflect that statement as well. So lots of really great successes. But for us, it was the first time we'd run an open influencing programme. So there's lots of learning that's since fed into our programmes we've had since then around criminal justice and welfare. And I just wanted to share some key elements of that learning in 2 parts, really. Firstly, learning about factors that contributed to success for projects themselves, and also learning about running an influencing programme for us as a funder. So starting with features of projects that contributed to more successful influencing, firstly, I'd say clarity of purpose. So projects which tended to deliver most successfully were those that were really clear what they wanted from the beginning. So for example, Latin American Women's Rights Service, who wanted to improve support to migrant survivors, they were really clear that they wanted to try and have a firewall between reporting abuse and immigration control. And that clarity is something we really try to encourage in our applications now. So we find that charities are often really clear on the overarching ambition, but less clear on the tangible changes they might realistically be able to shift. Another important factor was flexibility, which might seem a little odd, given that the first factor I'd say was clarity of purpose. But I think the ability to shift and adapt approaches was really important. So rather than continuing on with an approach that you kind of set out at the start. So for example, in the My Sister's Place project that I mentioned, they initially planned the train-the-trainer system to spread the trauma-informed approaches, but in consultation with services decided that a system that was about longer-term embedding of the approach was needed instead. So very few projects looked exactly the same at the start as they did at the end, not least because when we launched the programme, we didn't know the timing of the Domestic Abuse Bill through Parliament. And finally, on project successes, I think project infrastructure and support was a really important factor. So Transform projects had varying degrees of experience in terms of doing influencing work, and lots of projects only had a single worker that they employed. So the best projects had support systems in place, whether that was through the chief executive or senior management, or buying in skills from other organisations to help support that project and that worker which was alongside the support we could provide as a funder. In terms of learning for us as a foundation and around programme design, having a programme specifically focused on influencing rather than service delivery was important. So we already provide core and restricted funding, but that inevitably focuses on service delivery. Providing a structure of support made up of several components was also important, so people could learn and interact in different ways that worked for them. We held learning events, provided support through DMSS, provided consultancy support through our Funder Plus programme called Enhance, and direct support from our grant managers. And we can't know for sure the comparative difference each made, but it ensured people had different ways to engage depending on their needs and styles. And we in particular found that bringing in external people to be particularly helpful. So one of our most successful sessions was getting someone from Practice, a migration charity, to talk about their Windrush campaign. So charities could more objectively assess the approach rather than being too focused on the policy detail. We also found that bringing together a modest number of projects with some kind of sense of common purpose was important. So all of the projects we funded worked on domestic or sexual abuse. So they shared some commonalities, even though there was diversity across the portfolio. 16 as a number of grant holders was small enough to get to know people, but big enough to find some with a greater crossover. And there were also different levels of experience across the group. So Ava and Agenda, whose core work is linked to influencing, were open to kind of sharing their experience with more traditional service delivery charities that were moving into influencing for the first time. And we tried to encourage them to pick up outside of the sessions that we facilitated too. So, for example, we funded one project around disability, learning disability and domestic abuse that we helped to put them in touch with another that was around young disabled people and domestic abuse, so they could share intel and approaches. And that size and approach has helped charities feel that they were part of something bigger, with top-down commitment from the start and a recognition from the foundation that some of the work we funding was more risky, and they kind of really were pleased to see that. So, for example, Reshape, they focused on improving services responses to people who've caused or have the potential to cause sexual harm. And they didn't hide their surprise that we'd be willing to support a project that might be seen as useful and align ourselves with that. But that's something we were really keen to do. And finally, taking a theory of change approach and sticking with it was useful. So while many projects found the theory of change approach challenging, it was a useful framework that projects came back to during their reporting. I would say that the timing of introducing a theory of change is tricky. So for some projects, when we did it was too late, which was after the funding had been awarded. But learning from our criminal justice programme is that it can come too early too. So in that case, we provided theory of change training as part of the second stage application, and that was too early in some cases. But I think sometimes it's related to the language of theory of change can scare some people. But I think that the practice of linking activities to outcomes is something that is critical for influencing work. And so is something we try to encourage no matter what we call it. Overall, I'd say the success of Transform has paved the way for us to run other influencing programmes. So we have one in the criminal justice sector, we have one working on welfare challenges, with the learning of each programme continuing to feed into the development of the next. But what remains clear throughout is that there's value in supporting charities to pursue their own influencing objectives. This isn't about a foundation saying, we've got this issue, tell us how you're going to address it. It's for charities to decide themselves. And the impact of that can be much wider than the specific influencing target they might start with. Not least how it's helped charities make a step change in their platform and approach to influencing, like we've seen with Gallup in terms of their work around LGBT+ survivors over recent years, but also infiltrating into the strategic approach of an organisation more broadly. So Ava's training of peer researchers and involving survivors has more deeply embedded that approach across the organisation going forward. As a funder, I would probably say about our funding opportunities. So we don't have any specific influencing programmes open at the moment, but our unrestricted funding did launch last week. So would encourage you to have a look at lloydsbankfoundation.org.uk to find out more. And now I'm just going to hand over to Sarah Scott, who is part of DMSS, who worked with us on the Transform programme, but who's also been working with National Lottery Community Fund on their Women and Girls Initiative too.
Hello, and yes, it's nice to see Caroline, and it was great working with her and with Lloyds on the Transform programme. And it's been equally great being part of the learning and evaluation team for the Community Fund Women and Girls Initiative. That's along with colleagues from the Tavistock Institute and London Metropolitan University. And it's brilliant to be here on International Women's Day. As Rowan mentioned, I grew up in Middlesbrough, and I first got involved in the women's liberation movement there in the late 1970s. I remember plenty of events like this, only not on Zoom. And they usually ended with dancing. Some of you may be old enough to remember the Northern women's bands that played at those kinds of events. And I particularly remember not the music, but the fact that they had these fantastic names. So there were the Brazen Hussies from Bradford, and of course, Newcastle's Frigging Little Bits. When we first got involved with the Women and Girls Initiative in 2015, the women's sector that had its origins back then didn't have an awful lot to sing and dance about. You probably recall that feminism had been rather out of fashion for much of the 90s and the noughties, and many women's centres had closed, girls' work had all but disappeared, Vogue services had seen funding shrink dramatically, and the kind of activism, publications and conferences that had sustained the sector back in the 70s and 80s, it had dwindled, and services supporting women and girls were often very isolated. So the WGI, the Women and Girls Initiative funding programme, was dead exciting to us because it hoped to address at least some of those deficits. It wanted to strengthen organisations and increase their chances of survival. It's a 5-year programme and it's 3.5 years in, and there's plenty of evidence that it's been doing pretty well in achieving some of those aims. So some of the 62 organisations that were finally funded under the programme were hanging by a thread when they got that funding, and they described it as a lifesaver. I remember that one CEO told us that the funding came at a point when they were on their knees and it was sink or swim, and that funding saved them. It's important to save organisations at that kind of point, because once an organisation's gone, it's gone. And if the service they provided is needed, then the chances are it'll have to be recreated from scratch, and that's hugely wasteful of women's energy. But the WGI was not intended just as a life raft, and many projects who completely transformed their organisations and had utterly new developments came out of it. One that springs to mind is actually on the Isle of Wight. So Women on the Wight created a whole new women's centre in the course of basically 12 months. But closer to home, WGI funding helped the Angelou Centre establish the first specialist Black and minority ethnic refuge in the Northeast. The refuge was quickly oversubscribed, and Angelou had been able to expand their provision. But at the same time, it helped them gain recognition from other agencies in the region and to become so much more of a go-to organisation for local services needing advice or training. And being taken seriously at that point in time by the National Lottery Community Fund increased the confidence of projects. They appreciated the fact that other organisations were actually interested in what they were doing and were acknowledging their expertise. And their confidence was also raised, I think, by being that feeling of being part of a sector, having contact with other organisations and feeling involved in a movement for change again, rather than just a lone voice. I think Aspire is a really good example of that. In Chesterley Street, it always had deep roots in the community and a philosophy of women helping women, so that its services reflect not only what local women wanted and needed, but also what they themselves had to offer. WGI funding enabled Aspire to embed that co-production in everything that they do. And I think it's deepened their commitment to and their confidence in their own philosophy and practice. The peer-led approach of their Supporting Sisters project gives women a sense of ownership as well as of belonging. And I know that many have continued to volunteer over the lifetime of the programme and are now confident to mentor new women entering the service. Lots of organisations have experienced WGI funding as increasing profile, status and influence, just as Transform did. So Women's Community Matters in Barrow, they have become a real one-stop shop. They told us that the funding had helped them move from being a small community organisation to an organisation that is professional, business-minded, and really able to compete and collaborate with big public, private, other charities. Their level of multi-partnership working has gone through the roof, and they've become a real partner with local services in the council, health, schools. And there's been a snowball effect on funding, with new funding being gained, in their case from the Arts Council and in relation to children's services. But the fact that WGI funding was long-term has also enabled them and other organisations in this programme to attract and employ more highly qualified staff, because people feel more secure about taking that jump into the voluntary sector. And for them, being able to employ the odd social worker or midwife or youth and community workers actually upskills everyone in the staff team. And that in turn has made them appear more attractive and robust in the eyes of funders and commissioners. So the security of that funding has been terribly important. And it's not just helped them gain more funding, it's helped organisations take some risks and to trial some new ways of working. So the Blossom project at A Way Out in Stockton is a great example. It aims to prevent the sexual exploitation of vulnerable young women through empowerment and advocacy. And it was always committed to developing peer support. Initially, they developed some rather structured sessions around what that might look like. And they told us they were kind of providing a template to young women. But the young women were saying, we want to do this. This is about what we can offer. And we'd really like a bit of space to kind of grow and influence that ourselves. So the staff stood back and empowered them, enabled them to lead, and it's been very successful. They didn't get it right first time, but they've learned what sharing power and empowering young women can actually lead to, which is much more important. So the fund has plenty to be delighted with, and these things have not been achieved by accident. They commissioned a learning partnership to accompany the programme, and the team they commissioned, which was our guys, already knew the women's sector well. They were trusted, we were trusted by a lot of women's services, and they made strengthening the sector a key aim of the programme and then left it to us to work out how to do it. As many of you know, our approach to boosting capabilities and confidence and sector identity has been through a series of workshops and masterclasses, setting up action learning sets, out of which we've then published the briefings for external audiences, which many of you have seen in the email links sent out in the run-up to the event, and through individual mentoring for projects. And we've aimed to co-produce all the activities in line with our feminist ethos, and strengthen the message that co-production was valued and would be supported. It's sustainability that's often seen as the gold standard of effective grants programmes, but it's often seen as being simply about kind of stabilising and diversifying income, when really it's just as much about clarity and confidence of purpose, strength of leadership, profile, staff skills, and connection with the women you're working with. The Community Fund awarded WGI funding and support in a way that has really enabled women's organisations to develop and grow in all those respects. I'm very proud to have been part of it. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Sarah and Caroline. That was so useful to hear from you both. Some really key messages coming out there around co-production and learning, and how important that is, but also how some of the organisations that, you know, hearing from all the speakers, some of the organisations that are delivering emergency services or are delivering services that really should be statutory funded but aren't at the moment, are still getting their funding from grants. But I think really good that there's a lot of learning. We love learning in, you know, as funders, we absolutely love it. And generous learning, you know, sharing the learning is really key. Just before we go to a break, and we're going to have a 5-minute break, we have one more poll, and then we're going to hear afterwards from the women and girls services that helped us produce this event, and also we have 3 panelists as well who've answered some questions. So the first thing to do is just before we have a break is go to the poll, which is, how are you feeling about the event? And so if people want to just put something in right now, that would be really helpful. So what have we got? We've got lots of interested, which is fantastic, 60% interested, and we've got some proud as well, which is lovely, which is fantastic, really good to hear from people. In the break, we have a video that we are going to play from the Young Women's Outreach Project. So obviously, you know, people may need to leave, but if you do stay around, then you're going to have a real treat with the video that was produced by young people, young women from this project. So yeah, enjoy, and see you in 5 minutes time at about 11:05.
I am not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, 'cause we don't want your broken parts. I've learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Run away, they say, no one will love you as you are. But I won't let them break me down to dust. I know that there's a place for us, for we are glorious. When the sharpest words wanna cut me down, I'm gonna send the blood, gonna drown them out. I am brave, I am bruised, I am who I'm meant to be. This is me. Look out, 'cause here I come, and I'm marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen, I make no apologies. This is me. Another round of bullets, it's I'm gonna send the blood, I'm gonna drown them out. This is brave, this is bruised, this is who I'm meant to be, this is me.
Great video, great song. So it's 11:05. I hope that was long enough and people, as many people as possible, got to see that song. We can certainly put a link to that video in the learning pack, because you know it's a really lovely achievement from the Young Women's Outreach Project. Fantastic. So I'm now going to hand over to the Northeastern Cumbria, some of the region specialist services working with women and girls. And the first one that we're going to hear from is Aspire. And this is Janice, who's going to talk. Hi, Janice. Janice, talk to us briefly and then introduce a video. Great. Over to you, Janice.
Good morning, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. I'm delighted to be here today. And it's been so great to hear all those inspirational speakers. I feel so uplifted already. I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to Aspire before we hear from 3 women who access our services and have written poems. So basically, I don't think I can give a better introduction than Sarah did, actually, but just to say we are Aspire Learning Support and Wellbeing, and we're based in the heart of Chesley Street, County Durham, delivering holistic, person-centred approaches and services. We provide a safe space responding to complex issues, which I think we've heard a lot about this morning, using a trauma-informed approach. We also promote peer-led interventions, and lots of our work is around peer mentoring, where women themselves are coming through services, training, and then delivering a lot of the programs themselves. And these include things like one-to-one confidential services, support groups, some very specific around domestic abuse, self-harm and suicide. We've got a comprehensive range of learning programs, volunteering opportunities, a women's wellness service, and these are all supported by an on-site creche facility, which is fundamental for a lot of women being able to access services. We've heard a lot today about the inequalities that women face and continue to face, and the women we are working with, we are seeing more and more the disproportional effects of poverty, issues of domestic abuse and historic abuse, isolation and poor mental health, often very complex issues of mental health. Most of the women have care and responsibilities, and many of the older women are hidden victims of domestic abuse. And we know and have heard today how the pandemic has impacted further on these issues. The theme for today is choosing to challenge, and I think it's really crucial that we continue to challenge the inequalities women face as an ongoing issue. Women regularly speak to us about the impact Aspire has had on their lives, and how for some it's about keeping them going on a daily basis, connected and safe. And for others, it's the catalyst for changing their lives and going forward to take control and live the life that they've always aspired to live. So we're now going to hear from 3 women who have written poems about what Aspire means to them. So
Life had me almost broken. I was only looking back. I couldn't see the way ahead. The blue had turned to black. A helping hand was reaching out and helping show me the way. Aspire's door was open and it welcomed me that day. With cups of tea and warm support, I felt my whole world brightening. In time I was encouraged. That's when life became enlightening. I remembered who I used to be before the storm clouds and the rain. Aspire's sun was shining and it made me myself again. My gratitude is infinite. They got me back on track. I'm not afraid because I know Aspire will always have my back. Mrs. Average needs a friend, someone to listen to the end, to give support and ways to cope, plus positivity, care and hope. So Aspire is where to go. With COVID rules, they tell her no. All's not lost, it will be fine. Groups for support have moved online. She joins on Zoom and quickly finds friends to help her with all kinds. Stay home, stay safe, and you will see Aspire's still there for you and me.
This is my Aspire, my safety place, with staff always there to love, care and embrace. And when I get lost on my life's journey, I know Aspire is always there for me. They gently take me by the hand and lead me through my darkened land. For Aspire is my way of life and gives me strength to carry on and fight. And at times when I feel alone, with no one there, I know Aspire is waiting to listen, to care. They give me the strength to carry on and stand by me till my doubts have gone. Aspire has made me realise I'm not stupid but very wise. They boost my confidence when I'm low, so I'll let my determination start to flow. I am accepted for who I am, no masks, facades, or even a sham. For I am a permanent part of Aspire's family, and I know they'll always be there for me. In these dark times of COVID-19, Aspire staff can still be seen, going out to those in dire need, making sure they have a decent feed, checking on those ladies living alone, giving constant support, verbally or by phone. The staff truly care so much, they all have a loving touch. So many women come through Aspire's doors. Some may hesitate or even pause. When the staff come out with a smile, then you know it's going to be all worthwhile. For Aspire has become our safety place and a new way of life we can now embrace. So thank you, Aspire, for all that you do. I would never have coped without you. I hold Aspire in my heart. You gave my life a new start.
Lovely. Thank you, Janice and Aspire. And let's now move straight on to Joanne from Young Women's Outreach Project.
Hello, for those who don't know me, I'm Joanne, Chief Executive for Young Women's Outreach Project. We're based in Gateshead. We work with young women aged 11 to 19 and well, it's a fabulous project, as you can see. Thank you for all the comments in the chat about the video. It always makes me very emotional and it makes me really proud to do what I do, and I feel very blessed a lot of the time. So you know, it's been difficult times. the video, I think, I think what it says more than anything is young people want to be recognised, they want to be their best, they want to be heard, and they want to see people to see their capabilities. And actually, they just want the best life. It's a long journey for a lot of young women. Things have not been easy for young people for a very long time. We used to be a very, very early intervention project. Young women used to come to us with, just little problems really. And now we are like an emergency service for young women. And that all happened when all the cuts to the services came along. It used to be, it didn't cost us a lot to run the project at one point, and now we're reaching out for money left, right and centre to anybody that can kind of fund us. We had a bit of consultation with the young women just recently about what it is they want and what their hopes and fears are for the future. What was really interesting, I could say a lot of our young women have never really been interested in school, or school's been a place of hardship. But there was a real true panic about their education, realising that they've nearly had a year out. There was a real panic about their future and where they're going to go, and what is the future for them. There was and others that had been out of education through very complex circumstances actually felt really relieved, because actually this year has given them the chance to catch up with some of their work. That was a really lovely thing, I think, that I heard just recently. Young people, they want to grow their life, they want a good life. And also I think most young people, like we all do, just need a good listening to once in a while to unpick some of the issues, give them the skills, and then, help them to unfold and unpick all the issues, build up their, problem solving capabilities. I think they need to learn a lot of soft skills, and that's something that's not very often funded. Those key skills like communication, teamwork. Young people have said during lockdown they've suffered so much more bullying on social media platforms. Many feel very trapped and know where to go. They've also talked about relationships that they have at home. Sometimes that's not been the best place for them. Sometimes that's a place that's really not good, and schools become their safe place. So it's been a really hard year for young people, and I think for the future, we really need to put them on an agenda so we can make sure they listen and they're heard to. I think funders, commissioners, statutory services, I think we all need to go back and to look at that early intervention help.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Joanne. That's really, really useful to hear directly, your experiences of what's going on for young people at the moment, and really clear that, there's a lot more complex needs, and this, what keeps emerging is this emergency service, sense of that, the women's sector are doing very much an emergency service. So, okay, let's move on to Sarah from A Way Out. Thank you for joining us, Sarah, and over to you.
Hi, I'm Sarah McManus. I'm from A Way Out, and it's great to be part of the regional learning event like this on International Women's Day, and to have the opportunity to share with you the information about the Blossom project that was established in 2016. This project that you're about to see a video clip of was set up and shaped by lived experience to work with young women in Stockton aged between 16 and 24 who are at risk of harm or exploitation, or experiencing a number of disadvantages. The project is continued over the last 5 years to be informed and led by the young women we are working with, so that it now supports girls from the age of 13, acting as a bridge covering the transitional period up to and into early adulthood until the age of 25. Our approach is asset-based and person-centred, working with the whole person, and is trauma-informed, building trust, providing choice, prioritising safety and collaboration and empowerment to help strengthen rights, entitlements and capabilities and inform social change. The girls and young women we work with are at the heart of everything that we do. And here is a brief video clip showing how the team helped make this happen, and also hearing from some of the young women that we work with.
Well, when I first started, I don't know how long ago it is now, 2 years, 1 year ago, I was very like socially awkward, and like I'd feel sick when I was in like situations that I didn't like. And other times being in the group, it was like really nice and welcoming, so that helped me feel like really welcomed, and it was really nice. And now I don't feel sick at all, like ever, when I'm anxious, which is a very good bonus. Blossom helped a lot with one-to-ones and knowing that I could speak to someone if I were feeling down or quite anxious. It's just a really nice atmosphere just to talk to all the girls that are there, and got a few like relationships out of it, so it's been really, really good. It's helped me out a lot.
Even though we can't actually meet up face to face, I still feel really supported, because you can message any of you at any time and you get back quite quick and you're really supportive. I really enjoy these as well, these sessions, like the peer support, as you call it. It's really helpful.
I truthfully, like, I don't speak to you as much, even like since the start of lockdown and stuff, but like it's always so helpful knowing that like if I need to talk to someone, like I've always got someone there to talk to, like no matter who it is. It's just nice to know that like I've got like there's someone there that'll happily help me out.
I didn't have a life before Blossom, I just sat and did nothing.
Oh, I broke my heart there, please. Oh. But I know what you mean though, like I think me and you were always there, weren't we, every single Blossom?
Yeah.
It's to do for us, wasn't it? Because we were quite, not isolated people, but we didn't really go out the house much, so it really helped us to get out the house, didn't it? Get out the house, really. But yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah, and for sharing that video as well. That was a really lovely video showing the work that you're doing. Let's move on to Rosie from the Angelou Centre. So over to you, Rosie. I know you've also got a video. You're on mute, Rosie. Still can't hear you. At the bottom, there's 4 little buttons. There should be 4 little buttons. If you want, how are you doing with that? You have unmuted. Is there anything you can do about this? Oh. Okay. While we are waiting for Rosie to rejoin, which I think is what she's going to do, let's move on to Rebecca, and then we'll have. Oh, hang on. No, here we go. Here's Rosie. Can we hear you now?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here alongside such incredible projects. Thank you for your patience. And I just want to kind of acknowledge on International Women's Day all the fantastic work that probably everybody who's here in the audience, you know, the leaders, the workers, the survivors that are here are doing day in and day out. We're gonna present some of the voices of the women that we support. When we started our project through the Women and Girls Initiative, sorry, if you could move on to the next slide, please, When we started our work through the Women and Girls Initiative, we were developing a specialist refuge for Black minoritized women. We were really aware of the need that there was for women who had no recourse to public funds and women who were excluded from many other mainstream generic services. And we needed a funder that recognized that historical struggle of Black feminist organizations We are a Black and minoritized women's organisation. All of our workers are Black and minoritized women, and we are led by and for. In fact, we consider our organisation to be working with the women. We consider ourselves to be an overall we in the work that we do. Challenge has always been central to our work. And that fight for women's rights has always been central. And we've developed all of our services in consultation. In fact, the Refuges, which the Women Girls Initiative funded, came out of that consultation. It came out of women coming to us and saying, we really need support. We're sick of being put in bed and breakfast. We're sick of being returned to our perpetrators. We're sick of not being supported. We're sick of having our children removed from us because they didn't have that specialist support. And I think Sarah Scott referred to that connectivity of that need around a movement in terms of social justice, in terms of women's rights, that absolutely connects to the women's sector and the work that we do when we are led by and for. We're just going to go on to a brief video that really gives you an insight into the kind of struggles that the women that we support go through. The majority of women who access our refuges will go to 7 to 9 services before they actually access safety and protection. And that means other women's services, generic housing services, statutory services, who reject them and send them back to perpetrators because they consider them to have no recourse to public funds. So I'll just go through the video now, eh? Thank you.
In that house, his family, they treat me like an animal. All the time when I ask them, please don't do this to me. They goes to me, you're here for slavery. Don't ask for these things. And I didn't call you in this country, you know, as my wife or as a, as a member of this family. You're just here to do things for us, clean home, cook for us, and don't ask for anything. Just do as we are saying.
When I live with my husband, because I have no permission to go outside, talk with my family, and don't eat food, don't use hot water, many things.
So I couldn't do anything because I didn't want to go in my country again. I just ran away from my country. I had a lot of problem with my family as well. Yeah, they all the time they was controlling me. I had a bad memory from them, and I never want to back to them again. Yeah, I didn't know what can I do to save myself of that life.
Thanks, A. If you could move on to the next slide.
His family.
Move on the next slide. So that just gives you a snapshot into the way that Black minoritized women are not only go through horrific levels of abuse, but are often dehumanized we were determined by the state, by services who do not give them the specialist support that they should be receiving, do not give them the safety and protection that they should be receiving. So what is the benefit of the specialist holistic services that all of us are providing in very different ways? You know, we are led by and for. We ensure that the women are institutionally advocated for. That means that we have to not only address the abuse that the women are going through, but we have to make sure that we address the structural inequality that the women face. Our services, all of our services, they're culturally sensitive, they're appropriate, they're rights-based, and they're secular. So although we're interfaith, we're intercultural, we're able to provide that support for all women. It moves women and children beyond that survival into economic and social independence. And for us at the Angelou Centre, it's really about moving women from the margins to the centre. We need to strengthen this movement. We need to strengthen and make sure that women and girls are free from violence and abuse. And we've got in the next video, I'm just going to go on and finish there with the voices of the women and the women that we support, who very clearly give you an overview of the power of the kind of work that we do. And thanks again to Big Lottery for the funding that we've had. We went from 5 bed spaces when we started this project 5 years ago with support from the Women and Girls Initiative, and we now have 29 bed spaces. We employ a fantastic team of Black and minoritized specialist workers, and we're able to provide that special support. And I'm proud to say that last week, we supported 2 women who for 6 years have been going round and round different services and haven't had the support, and they're settled, they've got their leave to remain, and they're starting a life free from violence, abuse. Thank you very much. You could go on to the next video, eh?
I will say, like you say, what is it that I get that I haven't had before? I have not gotten any before coming here. I was just on my own. Sincerely speaking, I was just on my own. You know, I was just in an ocean floating, nothing to get hold of. It was as I was, that was at the time as I was floating, the only stick I saw to grip on was the center. If you look at it from a human standpoint, it is vital to our existence that we are socially, economically independent. And not only builds your confidence, but you feel like you can now start supporting other women and their children through all of the stress that they're now going through, because now you have been at the end of the tunnel, so you can lead other people through as well. But if someone is thinking about it from a financial standpoint, it builds the economy of the community, it builds the economy of the country, and we add quite a lot to this system as well. So it's vital not only for the woman and the community, but it's for the state, the whole system itself, that we are financially independent, we are controlling our own lives.
Okay, great. So, and thank you, Rosie, for really important messages, and particularly around the importance of specialist women and girls services, those, you know, that have the biggest reach and really can share learning as well, which I think is so important. Thank you. Right, last person that we're going to hear from is Rebecca from Women's Community Matters in Barrow, and then we'll move on to our panellists. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rowan. Good morning. This morning on International Women's Day 2021, we've heard from women with national responsibility and influence, from those with regional prominence, and from some local organisations. Janice from Aspire in Durham shared some inspiring words from the women there. Jo from Young Women's Outreach Project in Gateshead spoke about the vulnerability of our young people. Sarah from A Way Out in Stockton told us about the young women that they support with the Blossom Project, and Rosie from the Angelou Centre in Newcastle spoke about the additional challenges for Black and minoritised women. And now me, my name's Rebecca, and I'm from Women's Community Matters in Barrow in Cumbria, and I want to talk about consent. But first I want to remind us about what links all these things and all these people together. So in the women's sector, we're not just a collection of different organisations, we're part of a movement. We're always working together, pulling in the same direction. We share a compassion, kindness, care and love for the world, and we challenge. We challenge unfairness, we challenge inequality, we challenge sexism and racism, we challenge the restrictions placed on those who experience poverty. The theme for this year's International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. We do choose to challenge every day. And our question is, do you? So where does consent fit into this? For me, consent is the key to our next big leap forward towards an equal world. It's the next big challenge we must overcome. If we want a world where women and girls are not systematically killed by men, and in this country, it remains 2 per week, and during lockdown, as I'm sure most of us know, that's increased significantly. So I'm not inflaming or exaggerating the issue. If we want this to end, we need to challenge all forms of violence. And that starts with the language we use. We've got firefighters, not firemen. We've got police officers, not policemen. Construction workers, office staff and work staff. We don't have workmen anymore. And we do not man reception or indeed man any desks. We staff reception, we staff desks. To those who say language does not matter, I say it does. It really matters, because consent is easier in a world where we get language right. We have to talk equality to get equality. Young women who come to our service and many others continue to tell us about their experiences of wolf whistling. Young men talk about being passive at best or encouraging, leering behaviours. They all talk about the threat as well as the experience of sexualised images being shared. Violence against women feels like it's everywhere, but I believe the biggest opportunity for us to seize right now is around consent. I believe we can change the culture. The young men who come to our Young Men's Project are appalled at the thought of sexual contact without consent. Let's stand alongside them and stand alongside today's young women and change our culture. In the next 5 to 10 years, I want all of our organisations to be clear about consent. And that means our culture being clear about consent, as that's where all our employees learn about their opinions and form their understanding. I want us to have a generation of young men and young women who understand what consent is and what it is not. I want them to know how to ask for consent. I want them to know how to give and not give consent. And I want them to expect that as the norm. I want staff who work in organisations, whether that's the police, hospital staff, housing departments, firefighters, DWP offices, council offices, town centre shops, my car insurance company. I want them to be angry when it doesn't happen. And when a woman discloses rape, sex without consent, or domestic abuse for that matter, I want a culture where we all say, I believe you. I will hold your hand. You are not alone. For our young people, our children and grandchildren, for those who'll be in charge when we are gone, and let's be honest, they'll be staffing the nursing homes we're in, I want them to have better relationships and I want them to experience less rape than us. I want to hear young people when they talk to one another say, I'd love to kiss you. Would that be okay? I think I would really like it if we did a bit of this. Do you want to try? I would really like to have sex, make love, or however they describe their intimacy. Would you? When rape occurs, I say to the man, prove she gave you consent. Let us not say to women and girls, prove you did not give consent. I hear some people, or as I like to refer to them, rapists, say, how do I prove she gave consent? But what I say is, how does she prove she didn't? If we live in a world where asking is the norm, it becomes so much easier. In courts and social circles, we still hear, she didn't resist or say anything. Please be clear, saying nothing is not the same as giving consent. It's the survival part of our brain keeping us alive. Critics might say, what about the women who lie? Let me tell you, they're virtually none. Women and girls lying about their experiences of rape and abuse are so small or rare an occurrence. Why would we focus on them rather than the 2 women a week who are killed by their male partner or former partner? Why would we focus on the handful rather than the horrific rates of sexual abuse and intimidation, or on the sex without consent, on rape? People might lie about being burgled or having the phone stolen so they can claim on their insurance. Women and girls do not lie about rape. They do not exaggerate sexual harassment and intimidation. We don't need to. In our service in Barrow, we stand alongside women and young people whilst they make the changes they want to make in their own lives. Here today, I would love for us to pledge to stand alongside one another while we make the changes we want to see in our communities and across the world. I want to ask you to add your voice to the movement, to put your name on the list. I would like you to allow me to stand alongside you, and for you to stand alongside us here today as we continue to challenge violence, discrimination, and unacceptable behaviour where and when we see it. I want us together to change the culture around consent and bring us closer to an equal world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was really powerful. Loads of comments in the chat, which we're going to be able to capture later in our learning pack, but fantastic from all of you. It's been so great to work with you and with Claire and Kerry as well, and Sue, to get this event together. And just, you do amazing work. So so good to hear from you all now. So we're going to move on to now. We have 3 panelists and we sent them 3 questions. And the panelists are Calla Warnock, who's a freelance funder and co-chair of Wearside Women in Need. We have Jess Donnellan, who's going to be joining us from Comic Relief. And we have Caroline MacDonald from Difference Northeast. And we sent them some questions, and you'll see with the PowerPoint when it comes back on, that we're going to pick a couple of the answers that they've given us, and we're going to have maybe a little bit of chat. We've got about 15 minutes, which is great. So to hear from Colour, Jess and Caroline. So can you move yeah, you're already there. If you can move the PowerPoint onto slide, I think it's 16, and then move it on to 17 so we can hear initially from Colour and Jess. So we asked, how do you think we can better work together and support each other in the women and girls sector, and how do we better include others who want to be involved? So if you could move on to the next slide, then we'll see Colour's answer, and we'll hand over to Colour and she can give us an overview of that. Over to you, Colour.
Hi, happy International Women's Day, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I wish we were all in a room together, but maybe next year. So I think I've been invited onto this panel because I bring 360-degree experience, I guess, in many respects. So I have worked for many different funders and continue to work for a number. But I've also worked in and volunteered for the women's sector for over 35 years. And I should say anything that I say today is just my view. So on the question of how can the women's and girls sector work better together, I think that the women and girls sector has always excelled in partnership working, actually. I think we do it instinctively. And we do it at all sorts of different levels. We do it at an individual service level, and we have always excelled at doing it at a strategic level as well. But there are things that get in the way, and there are many things that get in the way, but two of them have become increasingly difficult for the sector. So even pre-COVID, coming out of 10 years of austerity, where services and organisations' budgets had been pared to the bone, that space for, we're used to thinking in terms of space for action, in terms of women that we might work with, but organisations' space for action, for doing anything other than the day job of providing whatever service you're getting funded to do. That space has been almost entirely eroded. And partnership work takes time, it takes energy, it takes resource. If we're sitting in statutory organisations, if we're sitting as funders, and we need to go and do some partnership work, we get resource to do that. We need to treat the women's sector equally and give them the resource, the space, the time, and the infrastructure as well to support partnership working. Every now and then, there's a little bit of resource that comes down, often through Women's Resource Centre or elsewhere, to resource and partnership working, and then it works really well. But it takes time, and it takes somebody to be able to do the heavy lifting, because to be perfectly honest, and all you centre managers and service leads out there, you haven't got the time to do that. You haven't got 2 or 3 free hours in your week to go and develop partnership working. The other thing, and I really welcome Lloyds Bank Foundation's response around tendering, but the competitive element that has been introduced into the sector over the last decade or so, where organisations on the one hand want to work together, but on the other hand are set against each other, competing for statutory funding, is just not helpful. And we wouldn't expect it from any other sector. You know, we don't expect Marks and Spencers and Next to collaborate with each other and then compete for market share on the other hand. But we seem to expect this kind of mad juggling act from small voluntary organisations.
Okay.
I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kelly. That's really helpful. Can we move on to the next slide, which is Caroline? Yeah, over to you, Caroline.
Okay, so I've been reflecting a lot this morning about the women's sector, and particularly I've been thinking about my own situation in my own organisation, which is a disabled people's organisation, and thinking about maybe we should be doing something as a disabled people's organisation to support women and women's issues in particular. And I was thinking that we could really do with some support sometimes from the wider women's sector to do that, whilst also appreciating that you're all under a lot of stress. Certainly the last year has impacted on disabled women in a very specific way, and that we've been 3.5 times more likely to die, for instance, from COVID than other people. And we've found we've been even more isolated as we've had shielding and all other sort of restrictions placed upon our lives, which has made it even more difficult to reach out. Unless we are digitally included, then we're really, really isolated. But we're still much more likely to experience domestic violence, for instance, and we're still less likely to be believed when we talk about it, because obviously our partners and our heroes for the support that they give us and staying with us whilst we're disabled. So it's become more and more, we've become more and more insular, I feel, as disabled women. And within our own disabled people's organisations, we're still likely to meet misogyny or prejudice, and we could really do with some support. And I just feel that maybe as disabled people's organisations, this is something that we need to think about ourselves and support our women members. But maybe this is something that we can do to reach out to the women's sector. I was appreciating that you've all got so much pressure on yourselves, that maybe we could do with a little bit of your experience and expertise to think about how we do that. So I think that the sector is asked to be all things to all people sometimes, and that I can see the strain that places upon the sector. But I'd like to think today, going forward, that maybe we can forge some new partnerships where we can work as disabled people's organisations and the women's sector, and maybe lend each other some support.
Okay, that's fantastic. So that's an offer. That's not just an offer. It's let's see what we need to bring more people into the movement, more people into the women's movement, because people with learning disabilities, people with physical disabilities, they are much more likely to experience sexual assault or domestic abuse or physical abuse. So that's Caroline really saying, let's form some partnerships. And then Culla was talking about the partnerships and how there's no time. Where do we get the time to do those partnerships? So the National Lottery Community Fund know this, and we recognise that you need time to build partnerships and collaboration, and we will help you if that's something that we are able to fund in terms of locally in the northeastern Cumbria. We would want built into that time and capacity for people to build their partnerships. Let's move on to the next slide, please, which is introducing now Jess to what do you think local and national funders could do differently to improve outcomes for women and girls. Over to you, Jess.
Can you hear me okay,
Yes.
Rowan?
Yeah.
Great. So I know there's not much time to answer this, and it feels like a really big question. But one of the primary reflections I've had today is the importance of funders collaborating both with each other, but also with local government and national government too. So recognising that we all have resources to support the sector, but we're not doing that in a very coordinated way. And what that very obviously means is that not only are there not enough resources to do what needs to be done, but they're also not fairly distributed. And an example of that would be how critically endangered the by and for Black and minoritised women's sector has become. So I think collaboration is key. And I think then that also speaks to solving one of the problems that has been very vivid today, which is this business about how voluntary sector women's organisations are really providing emergency services. And so really working out how do we properly resource the sector, not only to put out the fires, but to do the prevention work, the early intervention work that Joanne was talking about earlier, and everything that needs to happen right through to recovery. And also across the life course. So making sure that we don't that we're responding to the needs of girls and younger women right through the life course, and being inclusive with our services of older women as well.
Great, thanks, Jess. Really helpful. Let's move on to colour. The next slide, please, so colour was asked the same question.
Yes, and I wrote an essay. and actually, I'm not going to say anything that's going into the pack, because I think possibly the most important thing that local and national funders could do that they're not already doing is to fund capacity for policy, campaigning and institutional advocacy. And actually, the two funders that have spoken today, Comic Relief and Lloyds Bank Foundation, they have done some of that, but there's room for so much more. And again, it's that, I mean, and you've heard how passionately and articulately some of the services on this this call today have been speaking and amplifying the voices of the people that they work with. But again, it takes time, and it's really difficult to find funding for this. And also, worryingly, government are now trying to stop charities, not just women's charities, but they're trying to stop charities speaking out. So if I tell you that the recent round of tampon tax funding prohibited anyone applying for any sort of policy, campaigning and institutional advocacy work from that large, significant fund, and that's a trend that we're seeing. We need those strong, clear voices from the women's sector. Without those voices, we wouldn't have a domestic abuse sector, full stop. We wouldn't have refuges, we wouldn't have rape crisis centres, we wouldn't have all sorts of legislation and all sorts of other things that we so desperately need, and there is so much more to do. Independent funders can resource this work, and it's never been more important to do that. So all the stuff in my little essay there as well. But if I had to say one thing, it would be to resource that campaigning and policy voice nationally and locally, because there are levers at the local level as well as the national level.
Okay, that's great. Caroline, over to you.
Sorry, I can ask me. I know I wasn't asked specifically about this question today, but sorry, that's not me. Okay, but I agree with everything that Colour's just said, and the importance of voice in particular. And on voice, I just have one challenge that I'd like to give maybe to our funders today, and we very much welcome the funding that we get from the Community Fund for Difference North East, and it'll make a huge difference to the independence and voice that we can give. But I would ask the funders, I would challenge them to, when it comes to funding disability, to consider the ratio of funding that they give to organisations that are run for disabled people and organisations that are run by disabled people, and just to think where the power lies within those relationships.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a really important point. We're going to make sure that kind of gets into the learning pack, that, you know, funders need to think about the by and for, rather than just funding organisations that say, you know, are saying they have a general service, as it were. Really important point. I've got some really rich stuff coming out of this, and I know we haven't got much time. What I would really love to do is just move on to the next two slides, which is what do you want the future of the North East and Cumbria sector to look like for the next generation of women and girls? All these answers are going to be in your learning pack, by the way. But if we can just hear really briefly from Jess and then from Caroline about just a summary of what you said, that would be perfect.
Sure. So I think what's really important for me is that the women and girls of the North East and Cumbria define that. As somebody who works for a national organisation sitting in central London, my voice is not at all valid in defining and shaping what the future of the sector there needs to look like. So I very much believe that it's for women and girls to shape and define. And I guess my role in that, what I want to see is that the sector is resourced appropriately, that there are sufficient resources to do that. And I very much see that as part of my role.
Thanks, Chris. And Caroline, the next slide, please, A.
So I think I talked in my slide here about the importance of maintaining that independent voice. So the services that we provide are absolutely super important, emergency services. But I always have this worry that in the disability sector, we had quite a strong voice in the 90s and early 2000s, and then we increasingly became consumed almost by services that were mainstream services, and that made it harder and harder for us to be able to speak out about in an independent way, because we were reliant on funding to keep our organisations going. I think for us as a women's sector, it's really important that we maintain that independence, and that as funders, again, that's something that's really important for you to take on board, that we need to be able to have that independent voice to speak out about what's important for women in the North East.
Right. Thank you so much. To further panelists, thank you, and it's just been really inspirational listening to you, and some really key messages that have come through. Lots of stuff coming up in the comments and the chat. This will all be captured in the learning pack, which we're going to send out to everybody. I'm really looking forward to that learning pack. I think it's going to be really useful, and will be shared widely. I suppose the final 3 minutes of this event is really, we've got one more polling question which people can go to now, which is about would you take part in future opportunities like this session today? Was it something that you see as the start of a journey in the North East and Cumbria around women? Was it useful to get together? Can we do some more of this? But also just generally putting into the chat the kind of things that you think would be good for the next steps in this region around women and girls. There's already a lot in there, I know, but if there's anything else you want to say now, then please put it in so that we can then have a look at it and put it into the learning pack, and it then sort of drives forward where we go next. So the poll is, will you take part in in any future. Let's just have a quick look. 95% are saying yes, definitely. That's fantastic. So that's really encouraging as to where we go next. Thank you so much, everybody, for being part of this. But I'm just going to quickly just thank the people who co-produced this, which was Joanne from Young Women's Outreach Project, Janice from Aspire, Sarah and Susan from A Way Out, Rosie and Umi from Angelou Centre, and Rebecca from Women's Community Matters. And then Kerry McGee, funding officer in the local North Eastern Cumbria regional team, Claire Doherty from the North Eastern Cumbria regional team, who have been fantastic and have been tireless getting this together, and Sue Botcherby as well from DMSS, who is part of the Learning from the Women and Girls Initiative. They've all worked really hard and worked well together to get this together. And I think, thank you so much for being part of this. We are going to send out a feedback form, so please do write down, anything you'd like different or anything that you'd like to see in the future. I think I've mentioned the learning pack about 50 times, but that we are going to send you a learning pack. And if you feel like making a pledge or something about what you want to see as a challenge, for International Women's Day, then please put it in the comments. And if you can make a contact with somebody today as a result of today, that would also be fantastic. And that's it, the end of the session. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of International Women's Day. And it's been lovely hosting this for you all. Bye-bye.